Voters go to the polls in Illinois next Tuesday, and they will decide just how much to shake up Springfield. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenberg from the State Journal-Register. Primary day is upon us. This coming Tuesday, if you haven't voted early, people will be going to the polls. Here to talk about it, a couple of folks who watch Illinois government and politics very closely. Charlie Wheeler is back, director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, University of Illinois Springfield, training young journalists. Also a longtime State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always good to be here.
Bruce Rushton is here, reporter from the Illinois Times. The guy, if you are in trouble, you don't want following you around. Bruce, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Bernie.
Okay, in the opening to the program, I used the idea, shake up Springfield. I'm sure that the Bruce Rauner campaign will send along a little cash in order to repay this honor, because that's his slogan. Okay, Bruce Rauner, the businessman from Winnetka, has been leading the polls for many weeks, as he has also been leading in spending, where he's put more than $6 million of his own money into the campaign against the three other candidates for governor on the Republican side, which are Dan Rutherford, Bill Brady, and Kirk Dillard. How's it going to come out, Charlie? Or what's it looking like toward the end of the campaign?
Well, I would say at this moment the smart money would be on Bruce Rauner. As you say, he's led consistently. He started out in single digits, and then he started spending money like there was no tomorrow. And he's been on, it seems like he's been on the air 24/7 all over the state forever. And as a result, he's really built up his name recognition, he's built up his positive values, and his three opponents had pennies compared to his millions. They couldn't get on the air, and some of them were reduced to putting up YouTube videos that would be seen by a couple hundred people, and they just are so far behind in the polls. I don't see any likelihood of anyone other than Rauner being the Republican nominee.
Yeah, the last numbers I saw had Rauner at 46%. I think Dillard was 26-ish. Rutherford was south of 10. Why he's still in the race, I have no idea. I mean, he's completely delusional, I think, if he has any thoughts of winning this race, and Brady somewhere between those two. So, I mean, the math says that if Brady and Rutherford were both to drop out, it might be a horse race. But other than that, I mean, there's just no...
Do we think, and I've talked about this on programs before, polls are sometimes inaccurate. Tribune poll, that had Glenn Pritchard down 25 points to George Ryan a few weeks before an election way back in the 90s, and then it turned out to be a 3-point race. Could there be polling error? Could there be last-minute decisions? And I will say, yeah, go ahead.
On all these polls that show Rauner comfortably ahead, his lead is in excess of the margin of error. You'll see a margin of error of plus or minus 4%, say, or 3%. What that means is that the number for the leader could be 3 points less, the number for the trailer could be 3 points more. But in this case, even with that margin of error, Dillard, who's in the number 2 spot, is still way behind. Now, another thing to keep in mind, I guess, about polls, and this is something that is not often mentioned, is what's called the confidence level. Basically, these professional polls are done with a 95% confidence level. That means that if we were to poll everybody instead of a selected few, if we polled all the people who were going to vote in the Republican primary, 95% of the time, that result would be within the margin of error of what we got from the selected sample. But what that means is that 1 out of every 20 polls are totally off the wall. And if you remember back when Rod Blagojevich first ran for governor, there was a poll that was reported the Sunday before in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that had Jim Ryan winning. Now, Blagojevich won fairly handily, and the ultimate explanation was, well, that was one of those 5% that are totally off the wall.
Interesting. Kirk Dillard has gotten endorsements from major unions, the AFSCME, which represents tens of thousands of state employees and others, the Illinois Education Association, the Illinois Federation of Teachers. some of their members, as Dillard will argue, are good Republicans, but many of their members are Democrats, and many of them are being encouraged to cross over and take Democratic ballots. Now, a poll of Republicans wouldn't necessarily find those people because we don't know how many people are going to cross over. Do we think this will be significant, or will it be too hard for traditional Democrats to go in? And in Illinois, you have to declare your party by asking for a ballot of one party or another if you want to vote in a partisan primary. Do we think that'll be a significant factor here?
Potentially, but I think, I mean, a lot of stars have to align, and planets, and quasars, and pulsars, and every other thing, I think, for anybody but Rauner to pull this out. Yeah, I think the crossover question is an interesting one. The unions or the teachers, my understanding, have pulled their money, pulled the big money ads.
They pulled the anti-Rauner
the anti-Rauner,
ads,
excuse me, yes.
And then there was a lot of money donated to Dillard, and positive ads are running. And
yes.
Aaron Schock's former chief of staff, Steve Scher, they have no love of Bruce Rauner because they accuse him.
Sure, but Scher's been at it for...
They're running ads as well on TV, I think.
Yeah, sure. Scher's been at this for a while, though, and it's showing no visible result, at least in moving the meter on the polls. I mean, if we're to use the polls as a yardstick here, Rauner's gained ground since Scher got really actively involved in this, I think. And so there's been no discernible effect. The mud that's been thrown at, or issues, I mean, one person's mud is another person's issue.
Rauner did drop from like 40-ish to like 36-ish in a couple of Tribune polls from one to the next.
Sure, yeah, I think he's back up though. I mean, that was when we had, I think, a lot of undecideds. The undecideds, I think, seem to be breaking, at least in part, in Rauner's direction. I think it's going to be a really tough haul.
Interesting. Bill, go ahead, Charles.
And I would argue this is probably something that viewers here are well aware of, but folks from Chicago don't seem to be that clued in on. There are a lot of people who are union members who are Republicans. You look at state facilities around the state. There are no state prisons in Cook County. There are very few mental health facilities in Cook County. So all those public workers are in downstate counties that traditionally, a lot of them, vote Republican. Moreover, there may not be a Caterpillar plant everywhere. There may not be, a prison everywhere, but there are school teachers everywhere. There is a school district covering every inch of Illinois. All of those teachers are unionized, so they're union members too. And the school teachers who are down in the southeastern part of the state, they are from the same fabric as the community. They share the same values, and so they would probably be Republicans. So to think that, well, the unions, if you're in the union, you got to be Democrat, I don't think that's true. So in a sense, there doesn't have to be that much crossover. If union members take to heart what Rauner says, they may see their own self-interest best served by voting for Dillard.
Yeah,
and there may be some Democrats who also are frightened by Rauner's attitude, and so they may take a vote. Now this was probably, you guys were probably still in diapers when this happened, so I'm dating myself, but I remember back when Dan Walker ran against Paul Simon in the Democratic primary.
I was in college and watched Dan Walker run.
In 1972, and there was a not so subtle effort by some Republicans to say we should go into the Democratic primary and vote for Dan Walker because he will be easier for our incumbent governor, Richard Ogilvie, to beat in the fall. Well, Walker won the primary, and as history showed, he also won the general election, defeating Ogilvie.
Yeah, interestingly, Bruce, in your publication, Illinois Times, Jim Crowe, longtime columnist, did a column comparing Dan Walker to Bruce Rauner. So a business guy who dressed down and took a walk across Illinois, Dan Walker from the Chicago area, as a Democrat, and now there's a business guy, Bruce Rauner, who wears a Carhartt jacket and talks about riding his Harley and his $18 watch. Any thoughts about the comparison?
And has voted in Democratic primaries.
Well, he's done that, and he's also donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to Democrats, which Newkirk Dillard, at least radio ads, are talking about. Is it a fair comparison? Charlie, you've seen both.
I would say it is, in the sense that here's a guy who is trying to portray himself as an insider, or as an outsider, pardon me. I would argue that anybody who has the ability to call up Arnie Duncan, who's heading the Chicago schools, and ask for special treatment for his daughter, is not an outsider.
He says he asked for the process of how to get her in the school, but not special treatment, just to keep the record
What did he
Right,
say,
right.
Bernie? That's what
Yeah,
he told
and
me
if I'm,
3 different things.
3 different things, yeah.
Including one on a live debate when he said he couldn't remember if it was his or his wife who talked to Arnie Duncan, but then
Yeah,
in
and
an
if- and if
earlier
I'm
radio
some-
debate, he had described the conversation with Arnie Duncan, how Arnie said, "Your daughter sounds great." So that,
well, and
that
if
caused me
I'm-
to do
and
a
if I'm
column
some-
about his credibility.
If I'm some parent on the west side of Chicago, do you think I can call an Arnie Duncan and ask, what are the ways that I could possibly get my daughter into this
who was
top
moving
school?
to the city from Winnetka at the time.
Well, if I lived on the west side, shoot.
Right.
But be that as it may. And he's also someone who has vacationed with Rahm Emanuel. So that to me makes him an insider. Now he's running as an outsider. In a sense, he's an outsider in that he has no experience in government. And I personally think that being governor is not an entry-level job. And the skills that you learned in the business sector don't necessarily translate well into government. In a way, it's analogous to when Michael Jordan decided he was going to be a baseball player. And he was a pretty good basketball player, but he was pretty much a bust as a baseball player.
But you've also got, I mean, not only is he close with Rahm Emanuel, I mean, he's close with the Reverend Meeks, too. I mean, they go trout fishing together out in the big sky country. And so this
Who runs a African-American, mostly church on the south side of Chicago,
Correct,
and
yes.
is a former state senator.
Right.
Democrat.
Thank you, Bernie.
Yeah.
The point is that this is a dynamic that I don't think folks have seen before. I mean, where they've got a Republican. I mean, you've got a guy. And look at Quinn's opponent right now. He's running 36% against an incumbent Democratic governor against Democratic voters. That's not very good, considering this guy has put up no campaign and has a criminal past. I mean,
I don't think he was convicted of
not
anything.
not convicted,
and
but
the wife dropped the charges in
correct.
the last
The wife
situation.
dropped the, but he has more.
Talking about Tio Hardiman.
Correct.
Of Hillside,
yes.
who used to run the ceasefire program.
He never said
in
I didn't
Chicago.
do it. He said he's sorry. But the point being is that it's a little bit of baggage for a person to face, who's running against a incumbent Democratic governor with no money. But he still got 36%. My point is that Quinn is vulnerable here. I mean, no matter who he faces in the fall, he's a vulnerable governor. He's never been popular. And now you've got Ronner. If he's close with Meeks, if he's close with Rahm Emanuel, I mean, Quinn can't even take Chicago for granted, Cook County for granted with friends like that, with Ronner. And I think that makes him different, I think, perhaps than what folks have seen before. They just don't know quite what to do with him. I mean, he's also got the potential, if he wins, he could buy the house without taking out a mortgage. I mean, and that's something that Mike Madigan would have to face. I mean, Mike Madigan's lock on the house, he can't just, engineer a race here and engineer a race there to get his way, because he'd have Ronner to get in the way. Say, no, I have more money than you do. And
But they do, I mean, Democrats do hold an extraordinary majority. And,
correct.
And kind of Illinois has trended blue, so you can't change philosophy as easily as just paying a lot of money to put up new candidates.
No, and I would, if it came down to Rauner versus Madigan, I would put my money on Madigan.
Just as the chess player.
Yeah. And part of it is Rauner comes from a background where he's in a position where he can say, Bernie, do this. And Bernie will say, yes, sir. Bruce, do this. And Bruce will say, yes, sir. It doesn't work like that in the General Assembly. It doesn't matter who the leader is. It could be a Mike Madigan. It could be a Speaker Bill Redmond. It could be a Speaker George Ryan. Could be a Speaker Lee Daniels. The leader of the House is a co-equal partner, and a governor can't do things by executive order. He's not Vladimir Putin. He can't say, I'm going to make this happen. He's got to deal with the legislature. And the legislature as an institution is jealous of its prerogatives. One of the reasons Blagojevich got in trouble was because he lied to the legislature. They couldn't trust him. And ultimately, he abused his authority as an executive. And that tension has been ongoing like from day one of the state.
Sure, he abused his authority as an executive, but Mike Madigan didn't indict him. I mean, that was Fitzgerald. That was a prosecutor.
Well, they did impeach him.
They did impeach him, but who went first?
Well, that's true. He was arrested
well,
first.
My point is
that got things going.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. There was no love lost, but I mean, look at Blagojevich. What a terrible, awful, stinky mass heap of a governor. And Madigan still didn't, I mean, he didn't call him out directly. I mean, he sent that memo out, I think it was authored prior to the last election. And then
co-chaired his re-election campaign.
Yes.
along with Emil Jones, because he was a Democrat.
Impeachment.
Yeah, well, and so he's kind of somewhat talking out of both sides of his mouth in that respect. But the point is that, yeah, I mean, it would be fascinating to watch Madigan play this brand of chess because he's never played it before, so far as we know. I mean, this is going, I mean, it would be a complete, I think, recalibration, perhaps, in terms of the dynamic between the governor's mansion and the legislature. It would be most interesting to watch.
And it'd be also interesting too. Governor Rauner would have to deal with Republicans in the General Assembly, and he's said anywhere from a third to 2/3 of them are corrupt. So they're probably
because they take money from the unions and
so
and that
they're,
kind
they're
of thing.
probably not feeling so happy about him either.
Okay, well, we'll see. Well, a lot of this discussion has presupposed Rauner. I will say that Bill Brady, the state senator from Bloomington, who represents part of Springfield, had a press conference in the last week. He was calling on Kirk Dillard to explain what deal he made with AFSCME to get their support, because what they want is higher taxes. And Dillard said, of course, I'm happy to take support from anybody, and I made no such deal, and people who support me don't necessarily get what they want from me. So we'll see what happens.
Rejected that endorsement that's offered to him?
There is that question. He said he discussed things with him. So just on Pat Quinn, there is the continuing stories about the anti-violence program that he implemented just before the last election in 2010 that was the subject of a very critical audit from Auditor General Bill Holland, saying that this $50 million, a lot of it went to places that we're not quite sure if it was appropriately spent. Continues to be a serious problem. Does this make Quinn particularly more vulnerable, or how is he going to look as we assume he beats Mr. Hardeman and becomes the nominee in the fall?
Well, it certainly doesn't help. I mean, I think that this is an albatross around him. How much it really weighs is yet to be seen. I attended the first day, at least, of Jerry Wright's trial last week. The daughter of Jeremiah Wright. And what I walked away with from that is the absolute lack of safeguards that the state had in place for these grant funds. And even the folks who testified the first day who uncovered the problem, if not for a chance story that appeared in the Chicago Sun-Times about the foreclosure on this theater that was involved here, this might never have been uncovered. I mean, that's appalling. And secondarily, even more appalling, and the folks who testified, who were the state officials who actually did the investigation, they gave the money. It's a 2-year grant. They gave it to the grantee in one lump sum. Here's $1.2 million. It's supposed to be spent over 2 years. Here's $1.2 million in one big fat check. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And there's no way to defend that. And it's my understanding that only recently had this practice been changed. So it's a big fat bullseye for whoever ends up running against the governor. And it's something that keeps happening. I mean, this sort of thing I think happened under Blagojevich as well, but it doesn't seem to be getting fixed. And this one in Chicago, I think we're about $50 million. The Sun-Times recently had a story. One of the folks who was hired is now being charged with murder. I mean, I mean,
he was handing out anti-violence
leaflets
or something, and was involved in.
Yeah. And underlying all this, of course, is the basic premise. How do you fight violence by handing out money to anybody? I mean, it seems to me that that's more an entrenched social issue. I mean, you fight violence, I think, by giving folks better educations. You fight violence by...
like Ceasefire, truly, that gets funding, and people argue that people can go out and talk, but you pay those people to go out and talk. So, I mean, there are programs that purport to do this. That's what T. Hardeman, claims help.
Show me the studies that show the efficacy of it. I mean, for $50 million, what do we get?
Yeah, and by the way, Jeremiah Wright, of course, was President Obama's preacher. And this was a federal trial in Springfield. But it based on a Chicago situation with the state grant, and Reverend White's daughter was accused of taking money and putting it to personal use when it should have gone to another program.
Yeah, I think that the central district of the state's attorney, or excuse me, the U.S. Attorney's Office has actually been targeting quite a few of these programs up in Chicago. I think they're right around at a dozen guilty pleas or convictions at this point.
And they're heard in Springfield, and this district, because it's state grants.
It's a state grant, state government, that sort of thing.
This has been a variety of different programs.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Understood.
Well, this audit, and this is actually a copy of it. This is the most damning audit that Auditor General Bill Holland has done since Blagojevich left office, and it basically is a litany of incompetence, of proper procedures not followed, of the records not being kept, of people not being able to explain how it was that I decided to give money to Bernie instead of Bruce.
What was that program called?
It was called the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. No, I mean,
I'm
it was
just a
just
newspaper guy.
it was
My
just-
check got
It was
next
just
week.
totally sloppy.
Yeah.
And in the best possible light, it's sheer incompetence. But there have also been calls for criminal investigations to see how much this money was in fact stolen. And if those come out during the course of the general election campaign, that looks even worse for Quinn.
Okay, we'll see. On another election topic, Dick Durbin is running for his fourth six-year term in the U.S. Senate. He, of course, lives in Springfield and is a Democrat. And two Republicans, Jim Oberweis and Doug Truax, are running. Jim Oberweis is now a state senator after some failed races for other things, including Congress and governor and U.S. Senate in the past. And Doug Truax from, is it Glen Ellen? No, it's something on the south side, a different two-named suburb. But Truax is a graduate of West Point and a businessman who works with employee benefits such as health care, and he's very critical of Obamacare. But he's been getting some not traction, but he's been way behind in the polls to Oberweis, who is better known for his ice cream stores and state runs. But Oberweis is vacationing in Florida the last week of the election. Thoughts?
Well, Rauner, where's Rauner been? He might be down there too.
Rauner just he doesn't come to Springfield, we know that. He's been some places, but he takes the tack of many
He's AWOL right now.
politicians who don't come to Springfield much, where there's a lot of reporters that actually understand state government. Anyway, Charlie.
You being among the foremost of
whatever.
them.
I don't want to talk,
I mean, I watch this stuff as people see me before know I've been watching this stuff since the Constitutional Convention in 1970. And after all these years, you think, well, okay, now I've seen it all. And I've never imagined a case where a guy who's a contested primary was going to go to Florida for a week right before the election. Now, granted, he probably figures he's comfortably ahead. But even so, the optics of it are bad. And his explanation is, well, I'm going to be running against Durbin, and Durbin's this big, powerful Democrat with all these ties to special interests. I got to be out about the country raising money.
From special interests.
Well, there are special
People who
interests,
care about
and then
good
there are
government.
people who care about good government.
My mistake, I'm sorry.
And I told my wife that I'd be there for her birthday. His wife, by the way, who apparently is a resident of Florida, she can't even vote for him on
She
Tuesday.
is registered to vote in Florida. They have a residence there,
So-
and
So
we've done a story on that
that's
to
what's,
explain
that's
that.
what's so neat about Illinois. Even after doing this for all those years, you wake up in the morning, you think, man, what's going to happen now? It just keeps you energized.
I'm curious, Charlie, where does this election rank? I mean, you've seen a lot more of these than Bernie or I have. I mean, no offense, but I mean, this one seems particularly on any different number of levels, not just the governor's race, but a bunch of stuff. I mean, interest-wise and fascination-wise, where does this one?
Oh, this is pretty high up here. One of the things that I find amazing is each election the campaigning seems to get more negative. The accusations that are thrown out there are more distorting of people's records. Sometimes people will say bald-faced lies. Mr. Rauner in a debate said crime has skyrocketed under Pat Quinn, which is demonstrably false. All you got to do is go and look at the FBI statistics, and in fact it's gone down pretty significantly, not under Quinn alone, but it's been going down since Richard Nixon's days. And there's more of this, what would you say, marketing the candidate than discussion of public policy issues. I defy anybody to be able to tell me, here is Bruce Rauner's or any of the rest of them, here is their blueprint for how we're going to get Illinois out of the fiscal hole it's in.
Well, I know Kirk Gillard said he's going to bring together a committee to redo our tax structure.
See, and in Kirk's case, Kirk has been around long enough that I'm sure he has to have some ideas. Now, Rauner hasn't been. He maybe doesn't have any ideas. I'll grant him that. But for anybody, for the other three, for Dillard, Brady, and Rutherford not to be able to produce a plan, I think is unacceptable, at least to me. I understand why they're doing it, because there are no easy solutions. It's not just waste management and abuse. You really have to cut programs or increase revenues. There's no other way around it. And in the collective judgment of all their campaign advisors, the general citizenry isn't ready to hear that message.
Interesting.
And I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, I'm wondering, I was going to ask, and on the same level, will the Republican Party, I mean, I talked early in the campaign about the circular firing squad where, you know, the candidates attack each other. It has proven to be that, because Rauner, who talked about being positive in the campaign, you know, he's got career fellas posters on the internet that look like good fellas, making the other candidates look like gangsters because they've all been in government for 20 years or more. Can there be a unity breakfast for the Republicans the day after this, or you know, given the race that they've had, will people come together behind their candidate? Is that expected, and will that happen?
I don't see a unity.
You good
breakfast.
Republicans, I thought I'd ask.
Well, I mean, Rauner's an outlier. I don't, you know, I think if there's going to be a unity breakfast, it's going to have to be up to him. I mean, he's going to have to extend those olive branches. Who was the legislator who said to get back in the grace, he's going to have to dole out a lot of campaign contributions? I mean, it was not a very smart thing to say, but it was probably accurate. And so, look, you can have a revolution, so to speak, and you can have a Reagan revolution anytime. I mean, you know, and so who knows? It could happen. But if Rauner is what Rauner says that he is, he's going to have to make some converts out of folks who really aren't in his tent right now.
We have Charlie here. He's a state fiscal expert in so many ways. I think
that's a
state
sad commentary on
there's
everybody else,
There's
right?
a new annual report that came out about the state, and I'm just wondering how things are looking. How bad is Illinois in
Illinois
fiscal condition?
This is the comprehensive annual fiscal report that is put out every year by the comptroller with, what would you say, a review by the Auditor General. And it shows that Illinois is one of 2 states that were in the red in the fiscal year that ended on last June 30th. And we were in the red to the tune of like $45 billion. Now, this isn't money that we have to pay right away. This is comparing what our long-term obligations are versus our long-term assets.
Including pensions, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot less because they passed the pension plan, right?
Well, that's not factored into
it is
there, I
not.
don't believe.
Okay.
But it's a kind of a snapshot in time of where Illinois stands. The other state that was in the red was Massachusetts. Everybody else came out a little bit ahead.
Okay, well, we're going to have to...
I was going to say, in terms of the general funds, which we pay most attention to, we actually improved by almost $2 billion in terms of bringing that shortfall down.
Okay, on that note, hey, take it as good news or not. Charlie Wheeler, Bruce Rushton, thanks for the conversation. Thank you for watching. Please vote, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.